Good evening. My name is George Andreopoulous. I'm a professor of political science and director of the Center for International Human Rights here at John Jay College, and I would like to welcome you all to this evening's event. We are very pleased to be hosting Kerry Kennedy, President of Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, to talk to us about Speak Truth to Power, an important project of the organization. Speak Truth to Power is a multifaceted global initiative that uses the experiences of courageous defenders from around the world to educate students and others about human rights and urge them to take action. Issues range from slavery and environmental activism to religious self-determination and political participation. The experience of human rights defenders is an issue of global interest and concern. In recent years, we have witnessed the shrinkage of democratic space in many societies, whether in the form of military coups, elections with predetermined outcomes, attacks on groups that are considered the other, restrictions on press freedoms, and crackdown on peaceful protests, to name just a few. Fundamental rights and freedoms are being challenged by state as well as non-state entities that preach the language of exclusion and intolerance. On the front line of resistance are human rights defenders who seek to collect and disseminate information pertaining to abuses and challenge their perpetrators before domestic and international fora. The task of defending them and enabling them to conduct their work without risk is a key precondition for the realization of a rights-respectful order. This lecture will focus on an important initiative that identifies and promotes these brave voices that seek to articulate and advance the cause of such an order. What these experiences teach us is that standing up to abuse and oppression and preparing to bear the consequences is not only a right, it is also a responsibility. This event was made possible by the contribution of many people. I would like to begin by thanking Kerry Kennedy for accepting our invitation to address our community on this important issue, President Travis, Lisa Galloway at President Travis's office, Aferdita Hakai and our team at the Center for International Human Rights, our Office of Marketing and Development, and Karen Robinson, Liz Fisher, and Kim Cohen at Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights. Last but not least, I would like to thank all of you for being with us this evening. I would now like to ask President Travis to offer a welcoming remark and introduce Ms. Kennedy. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and let me welcome those of you who are first-timers to John Jay, to our campus, and welcome the extended John Jay community to this very important lecture this evening, and a particular welcome to Kerry Kennedy for being here to deliver words of inspiration and wisdom on an important topic. For those of you who are here for the first time, this is John Jay College. You'll look out and you'll see what a magnificent campus we have. We have 15,000 students who attend John Jay, doctoral students, master's students, undergraduate students, and they're not all here in the room, but in many ways they are represented here because of our mission. Our mission is stated in a very simple phrase, educating for justice. So we think a lot about issues of justice here all the time, and that plays out in many different ways. We think about environmental justice and racial justice, international justice, economic justice, criminal justice, poetic justice. We have lots of ways of thinking about justice. So it's particularly fitting that we welcome Kerry Kennedy here tonight, who has devoted her life to a related and very important mission, which is to promote the notion of human rights around the world. She's the president of the RFK Human Rights Institute and comes here with an important mission and family legacy that she has taken on with great fervor and imagination. Let me just read to you the, I don't know if this is the official mission statement but I love it anyhow, of the RFK Human Rights is to partner with the bravest people on earth to create lasting change. So the topic tonight is who are those brave people, those human rights advocates, and what are the ways in which we, as advocates for justice here at John Jay, can support them and help realize their ambitions for our society. You have a bio of Kerry Kennedy, but let me just highlight some of the things that I think stand out. So this is an individual who has devoted her life to this work and has been appropriately recognized by some of the great individuals and institutions with whom she has adopted a common cause. And I'll just read some names that resonate throughout our history. Lech Walesa, she received the Eleanor Roosevelt Medal of Honor, the Thomas More Award from Boston College Law School. The World Vision and International AIDS Trust gave her a Human Rights Award. American Federation of Teachers, National Teachers Association, and the NSUT have all recognized her for her work. She is an accomplished individual and advocate as a legal advocate, as well as the work that she's now chosen as her life's work. And she's also an author of a book that has the title that resonates with tonight's lecture title, which is To Speak Truth to Power, Human Rights Defenders, in which she interviews some of the great defenders of human rights, again, in our era. Some of whom I'm pleased to say have been here at John Jay, such as Marian Wright Edelman, the Dalai Lama, who we expect actually to come sometime, Archbishop Tutu, and others who have been pioneers and advocates and inspiration to all of us. So we're so fortunate, Kerry, that you have come tonight to be with us and share some of your thoughts. I just whispered to her that I have to leave for a family obligation tonight that's come up last minute. So I won't be able to be with you and to join you in the reception afterwards. That's my loss. But please join me in welcoming to John Jay, to our lectern, to this event sponsored by our very own Center for International Human Rights and Professor Andreopoulous, who's been a leader on our campus in keeping this flame alive and making sure that this is part of our own mission. Please join me in welcoming Kerry Kennedy.
Thank you so much, President Travis and George Andreopoulous, and Henry Schleif is here, who's on my board. So great to be with you. The head of Discovery Channel, if you like Discovery, he's the guy. And my niece, Kate Kennedy, known as Kate the Great, in our family, and my great friend Gail Everts. Let me also introduce Karen Robinson, who runs all the education programs for Speak Truth to Power, Liz Fisher, who works for us, and Dick Inuzzi, also on our board. Stand up, Dick. Dick was the head of NYSED, which is the New York State Teachers Union. So he's a wonderful man. Thanks, Dick, for coming. I want to thank everybody for coming. I'm so sorry to be so late. I was delayed in a flight I was on from Boston. There's so much traffic coming here. I have to say, trying to get here reminded me of a friend of mine who lost his job during the recession 2008 a couple years ago, and he got a job right downtown in New York City, job offer. And so he got up, he was living in Westchester, and he got up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and he drove into the city, and he's looking for a parking space, and he's driving around 7 o'clock, no parking space, 8 o'clock, no parking space, 8:45, he finally pulls over, and he says, "Dear God, please get me a parking space. If you do, I'll go to church every Sunday for a year. And just at that moment, miraculously, right underneath the awning of the building he had to go into, a parking space opened up. And he looks up and he says, "Never mind, God, I found one myself." So, people often ask how I became involved in human rights. And, I've got 7 brothers and 3 sisters. And if you grow up in a family like that, you appreciate human rights at a very young age. My earliest memories are at the height of the civil rights movement, and my father was Attorney General at that time, and my mother used to like to take us down to the Justice Department to visit him, and she had a convertible, and she would put 6 or 7 children in, and a couple of dogs and a football, and we'd go down to see my dad at the Justice Department. And at the time, the head of the FBI was J. Edgar Hoover. Who's heard of J. Edgar Hoover? Okay, well, we're at the college, John Jay, so you know who J. Edgar Hoover is. So,
he didn't like us.
Huh?
He didn't like John Jay.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, he said, J. Edgar Hoover, at that time, he was not known for his love of children or his sense of humor. And he said that the 3 biggest threats to the United States were a former employee, Martin Luther King, and Robert F. Kennedy. And my father was his boss at the time he said that. So my mother actually did have a sense of humor, and so we used to love to go underneath the Justice Department, and there was a tunnel over to the FBI building, and we would pretend we were spies and go through the tunnel, and you could watch the sharpshooters at practice, which you can still do today if you want. And we used to go down there and watch the sharpshooters, and one day she noticed that there was a suggestion box in the bottom of the FBI building, which actually, those have disappeared, but they used to be around a lot in the 1960s. And so she took out her telltale red pen and made a suggestion and put it into the box. And then she rounded up all the kids and the dogs and the football and brought us up to my father's office, and that took her a little while. Meanwhile, a very astute FBI agent went and took the suggestion out of the box, read it, brought it up to J. Edgar Hoover, who immediately had it sent to my father's office, so that when we walked back in with my mother, my father was reading the suggestion, and it read, "Get a new director." So it was an early lesson in the importance of speaking truth to power. I had an idyllic childhood in almost every way one can imagine, but there was a series of things that happened during my childhood which were very chaotic and extremely hard to understand, and left a permanent mark on me and many of my siblings. And so that started in 1963 when my uncle, President Kennedy, was assassinated. And then 4 years later, Martin Luther King was killed, and 6 weeks after that, my own father was assassinated by a Palestinian terrorist after he advocated for defending Israel against incursions by its neighbors. Then when I was in 5th grade, one of my parents' best friends, who were always, their family was always at our house, the girl who was my age came to me and said that her father was beating up her mother. And I didn't know what to do about that. I didn't know if this was a secret, if I should how to protect her, how to protect her mother, who I loved, how to think of the father who was there, who was at our house all the time and playing with us all the time. How can I see him? Should I tell my mother? Should I not? What should I do about that? And then when I was in high school, I had 2 of my best friends were raped, a date rape with 2 men they had recently met. And one of my best friends died of HIV/AIDS, was one of the first people in the United States to succumb to AIDS. And so all these things were very difficult and confusing and awful. And I tell you those stories not so you should feel sorry for me, but because that's in my life. But everybody in this room has those stories. Everybody has some horrible chaos that has happened to them. That's what happens in life. And then I got an internship at Amnesty International. And I was 20 years old, and I spent the summer in Washington, D.C., documenting abuses committed by U.S. immigration officials against refugees from El Salvador. But it was an extraordinary thing because I learned about a document called the United Nations Declaration for Human Rights. And reading that document changed my life because I came to understand that summer that everything that was crazy in my life, everything that was chaotic and difficult and horrific, had one thing in common. They were all violations of human rights, and that there was a law against them, and that there were people around the world, the anti-apartheid leaders in South Africa and the mothers of the disappeared in Chile and refuseniks in Russia, who were just like me, who were in their countries and saying what is going on here is wrong. And they were using that document to create change. And I realized that I could use it too, and I could learn to use it. And that's what I've been doing for the last 30 years. I went to law school, I got out, and I've been working on human rights ever since. And, you know, it is an extraordinary document. If you don't know it, go and read it. And there are now many, many, many different laws in many different regions of the world that use that document to create change in their own countries, in their own regions as well. And I'll give you a couple of examples of ways we've used the UDHR and regional documents to create change just in the last year. We have a litigation unit at Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, and in the last year, we overturned the anti-homosexuality bill in Uganda, which made homosexuality punishable by life in prison without parole, using that document. In the Dominican Republic, we've worked on stopping an ethnic cleansing campaign, which actually the lawyers who we work with keep telling me not to use those words, so I take it back. But anyway, you get the idea. It's committed by the government of the Dominican Republic against Dominicans of Haitian descent. And in the 1920s, there was an agreement between the government of the Dominican Republic and the government of Haiti, and they brought over many, many 16, 17, 18-year-old boys and men to work in the sugarcane fields. And many of them stayed and they got married and they had children, their children's children had children, and that went on and on and on. And they have a part of their constitution, like ours, that says that anybody born in the Dominican Republic is automatically a citizen of this country. But they have a codicil that says, unless you are in transit or unless you're in transit. And that was meant to cover the children of diplomats and the children of tourists. But they got a judge about 3 or 4 years ago to say diplomats, tourists, and the progeny of Haitian sugarcane cutters. So overnight, they said to 10% of the population of the Dominican Republic, you are no longer a citizen. And we're taking away your papers, we're taking away your documents, which means that you, without citizenship in the Dominican Republic, you're not allowed to go to school, you're not allowed to have a job, and you're not allowed to have access to the education system, the healthcare system. So overnight, they disenfranchised a huge swath of that community. And so we're using the UDHR to put a stop to that. And then the third case is Jennifer Linehan. Does anybody know about Jennifer Linehan in this room? Okay, so Jennifer Linehan is an American woman. She was living in Colorado, in a small town in Colorado. And she had 4 children, 3 girls and a boy. And she was divorced from her husband. Her husband was beating her up and beating up her kids, so she got protective order, and each of the kids had a protective order against the husband. Nonetheless, he came to the house and kidnapped the 3 oldest children, the girls, who were 2, 4, and 6 years old at that time. And and so she called the police and said, please, I've got a protective order. He came and kidnapped the kids. You got to go get them. She called 6 times. The police did not react at all. They went and found somebody's lost dog. They took a dinner break. They did a bunch of other things, but they did not go and find the husband. Eventually, and then she went down to the police, and they still didn't react. So eventually, the husband showed up at the police station, and he opened fire on the police station. And the police came out and opened fire on him, and he was killed. And then they opened up the back of the pickup truck, and there were the 3 girls, and all of them had been shot to death. Jennifer Linehan never found out how her children died. To this day, she does not know that, because there was never a police investigation into the death of her children. She sued the police, and her case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that women with protective orders in the United States do not have a right to be protected by the police. That was the finding of the United States Supreme Court. I can see by your reactions that that's a surprise to many of the people in this room, but that is the state of the law in our country. So for most people would think that's the end of the story. There's nothing else that can be done. But we joined with Jennifer Linehan, and we went to the Inter-American Court for Human Rights, which is the Inter-American system. And we brought that case to the Inter-American system, and last August we won. Now, what does that do? That does not have precedential value in the United States, so it doesn't change the law in the United States, but it does have some moral weight. So we're using that win in order to get the Justice Department to change its regulations and its kind of the way it tells police how to deal with these issues. But it does have precedential value internationally. So in January of this year, there was a similar case in Kenya. And the judge in Kenya cited the Jennifer Linehan case to say that in Kenya, women do have a right to be protected by the police. And so that case went through. And so you can use this document, you can use international law to create change, not only domestically, but internationally. And it can have an enormous amplifying effect for justice for people all around the world. And that's what we've done. So, I think that over the last, when I look at human rights, since I started working in this arena in the early 1980s, I think there have been 2 sort of major changes. So one of them is shifting from the focus exclusively on governments. From just a little brief history of modern human rights came out of World War II. So before World War II, how a country treated its nationals was considered sovereign, and there was nothing other countries could do about it. But after World War II and the revelations of the atrocities committed by the Nazis, the countries of the world came together and said there are some rights that are so important, so essential to every human being, that every human being has them. And no country can violate those rights. And that's what the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is. And so for the next 40, 50 years, we in the human rights community have been holding governments responsible for failure to protect those rights or for violating those rights directly. So that's how it's worked. But today, of the 100 largest economies on Earth, 50% of them are corporations. Think about that. The 100 largest economies on Earth, 50% are corporations, and that number is growing. So today, if you want to be involved in human rights in the future, you got to go beyond the governments. You have to start looking at business and human rights. And that area has grown, and it's growing. And I want to introduce Rita Johnson right here in the back. Rita, wave there. Rita works with the RFK Center, and she runs all of our business and human rights program there. So that's one big change. The other thing that I think is really going on in the world today is that there's one area that is responsible or is the biggest threat to democracy, to peace, and stability, and that is hate. I think if you look around the world and you look at the areas of the world where democracy, peace, and stability are most at risk, hate is somehow involved in that. And just think about the headlines you've read over the last year. ISIS, #1. That is all about hate. Boko Haram, 400 little girls kidnapped by them, thousands and thousands of people killed by them. Rwanda, Burundi, Darfur, South Sudan, those are all wars based on hate. In Asia, you have the Chinese decimating Tibet. In Burma and Indonesia, governments going after ethnic groups. In East Timor, that was, again, a war, a invasion that was based on ethnicity and hate. In Europe, Sweden, the third largest political party in Sweden is the neo-Nazi party. Same with Greece, the third largest party in Greece is the neo-Nazi party. Again, same with Hungary. In Hungary, 50% of the Jews in Hungary said, in a survey last year, said that they had considered leaving the country because of anti-Semitism. In France, 7,000 Jews left last year and 50,000 Jews applied to emigrate last year because of anti-Semitism there. Italy, again, the third largest party is the Northern League, which is the extreme right-wing anti-immigrant party, anti-Roma party. South America, you look across South America, the way that indigenous people are treated. Specifically, if you need numbers, look at the contrast, the access to healthcare and access to education for indigenous populations versus the rest of the population. And this in the United States is also subject to this same arena. There are almost 900 hate groups that have been identified that are presently at work in the United States, identified by the Southern Poverty Law Center. And if you walk into any middle school or high school in the United States of America today, you will see scrawled somewhere in that school, and you will hear, if you walk down the halls or into the lunchroom, the words fag or bitch or retard or any other of those manifestations. And when those kids are confronted by those words of hatred, they have to make a decision. Am I going to stand up or not? Am I going to go along and go along with my friends and what they're saying and what they're doing? And that's the hardest decision to make, because standing up to your friends is a very, very, very rare thing for people to do. And yet that's what we're asking middle and high school students to do every single day. And each time they are confronted by one of those words and have to make that decision, they're exercising a muscle. And they're either exercising the go along muscle or the stand up muscle. And one of those muscles is getting stronger. And the stronger it gets from being exercised, the more it becomes the go-to muscle. So that by the time they become an adult, they don't even have to think anymore. They're just going with the muscle that's strongest, with the thing that they've done again and again and again for the last decade. And that's really what we're trying to confront through the Speak Truth to Power human rights education program that Karen Robinson runs, and that we are hoping to work here with a group from John Jay to bring not only to this college, but to get the college students here to bring into the community around this college, to the high schools and middle schools near here. Speak Truth to Power teaches about the UDHR and the history of human rights. And it teaches it through the lives of great, great heroes. People like Elie Wiesel, who survived the Holocaust as a child and said, "My dream for the future is that your children won't have my past." And people like Archbishop Tutu, who was the leader against the apartheid regime in South Africa, who said, "We don't have a God who says, gotcha. We have a God who lifts us up and dusts us off and tells us to try it again." And those are sort of the two bookends of human rights. On the one hand, identifying the atrocities and trying to stop them, and on the other hand, having this kind of firm belief in the capacity of the human spirit to triumph even under the worst of circumstances. And let me tell you about one of the other people in Speak Truth to Power, Marian Wright Edelman. Who's heard of Marian Wright Edelman? Okay, so a few of you. So Marian Wright Edelman was the first African American and the first woman to pass the bar in Mississippi and become a lawyer. And she did that in the 1960s so that she could defend civil rights activists like Martin Luther King and John Lewis and others. And she said, you know, at a certain point in our lives, all of us have to open up that envelope in our soul and pull out that piece of paper that tells us what we're supposed to be doing here on earth. And she said, I was blessed at a very young age to find a cause that to me was worth dying for. And that's made every day of my life worth living. And I think, you know, as a parent, that's what I want for my children. That's what I want for my 3 girls. I want them to find something that is so important to them that it's worth dying for and makes every day of their lives worth living. So that might be in social justice, and I hope it is, because I think social justice is the most important thing in the world. But it might not be. It might be for Picasso, it's painting a picture. Or it might be singing an aria. If you've heard my kids sing, maybe it won't be that. But, you know, so these stories of the human rights defenders are profound and can reach all sorts of students in all sorts of different ways. And we not only tell these stories and teach the history of human rights, but we give students the tools in order to create change in their classrooms, their community, their country, and globally on these human rights issues. So would you like an example of that? Okay, so for instance, one of our teachers is an 8th grade English teacher in Long Island, and her district has more languages spoken than any other district in the state of New York. And so most of our kids, like it's 99% on the school lunch program. And so we worked with her to create a lesson plan on chocolate. Now, 70% of the chocolate consumed in the United States is made by child labor or child slaves. Something I can see most of you are surprised to hear that. So most of her kids were surprised to hear that too. So she gave them research, she gave them information on what it's like to be a kid in slavery. And then each of them, the first week, had to write a poem in iambic pentameter from the perspective of a kid in child labor. Okay? So then the next week, she said, now we have to do expository writing. So here are the addresses and the name and address of the head of Hershey's and Mars and Godiva. And so all the kids had to write a letter to the heads of those chocolate companies saying, this is what's going on. What are you doing about it? And then a few weeks later, was Halloween. So they each went out and got index cards about the size of this. And they wrote on one side about the issue of child labor in chocolate, in the chocolate fields. And then on the other side, they scotch taped a piece of fair trade chocolate to the card. And then they did reverse trick or treat. So whenever somebody handed them a piece of chocolate, they said, thank you so much, can I give you this? Asking people to get involved and creating change and saying, buy fair trade chocolate, don't buy regular chocolate. And at the end of that exercise, those kids self-identify as human rights defenders. Now, that has an extraordinary, revolutionary change. Not on the outside. It didn't stop chocolate factories, but, it didn't stop child labor. But on the inside, it was transformative for those students who now self-identify, say, I am a human rights defender. And you know what happened in that classroom? The incidence of bullying plummeted. Because now that's not a cool thing to do if you're a human rights defender, right? As a result, that bullying went down, the less kids skip school, because the number one reason for children skipping school is bullying. So they start showing up at school more often. You know what happens if you show up to school more often? Your grades go up. So this is not a curriculum to address bullying per se, or to increase grade point averages for kids. That's not what it's about. It's showing kids that they are valuable, no matter how they do on the standardized tests, that they got something to give to this world. And that's really the beauty of this, because it shows them internally what that document says externally, that all human beings are worthwhile, that each of us have something to give to this earth, and that we need to treat each other with love and with respect. Now, why are we doing this? We're doing it because in the world of human rights, there's basically three types of human rights defenders. The most common are those defenders who come from a particular repressed group and stand up with their community against the oppression. So that would be like Nelson Mandela in South Africa, or Martin Luther King in the United States, right? The second group, which is far more rare, are defenders without borders. So that would be somebody at John Jay who goes and spends the summer working in Liberia, something like that, or go on the Peace Corps or Vista or something. The third group you almost never ever see in the adult world, and that's somebody who comes from the oppressing community and who stands up and says to their friends and family and colleagues, what we're doing is wrong. That would be like Bears Nade from South Africa, a person from the elite class, white elite, who stood up. We need that to happen. We need that to happen in the adult world, and we need to do it everywhere. We need to do it internationally. We need most of all in New York City for this to be happening, for everyone to feel comfortable, that they have the tools, that they have the words, that they are going to be valued, that they're going to value themselves more if they say, you know what, I don't think what we're doing here is right, than if they go along with it. And that's really our revolutionary goal here at RFK Human Rights. So, people ask often if I feel depressed when I work on human rights because it's all, rape and torture and horror. And my answer to that is no. And this is why, because I feel incredibly optimistic. And I feel optimistic because I see that the work we do works. And because I've seen this extraordinary, revolutionary change around the world because of the use of human rights instruments. So when I started working in human rights, all of Latin America was under right-wing military dictatorships. Today, there's not one left standing. And all of Eastern Europe was under communism. And today, there's not a communist government left standing. And South Africa was under apartheid. And it was at the height of apartheid. And today, South Africa has had a series of freely elected governments elected by a majority of its people. And women's rights was not even on the international agenda. And it wasn't until Hillary Clinton went to China in 1995 and declared human rights are women's rights, which was a revolutionary thing to say in 1995, believe it or not, that women's rights became put on the international agenda. And now CEDAW, the Women's Rights Convention, has been ratified by 183 countries. Not our own, so we still got work to do, but 183 countries. So all those changes came about not because governments wanted them to, or armies wanted them to, or multinational corporations wanted them to. In fact, armies and governments and multinational corporations tried to stop a lot of those changes in a lot of those places. They happened because small groups of determined people exactly like the people in this room today, harnessed the dream of freedom and made it come true, and said, I can make a change, we can make a change, let's work together, let's organize, let's figure this out, let's use the UDHR, let's create change. And that's what's always made change in our world, and that's what's gonna continue to make change. And that's why I'm here today, because we need your help. We need your help to put this into the schools. We need your help to create change in this community. And we need your help to make our city, our country, and our world a more just and peaceful place. Thank you very much.